What's up, everybody? Welcome to Political Fight Club. I'm Robert Durden. We're going to be reading Dreamland again today. It's by Sam Quinones, page 89. Short chapter today, guys. And just to make sure I clarify, I will continue with the book club on the YouTube channel, even though I'm moving all of my political content and other stuff to Rockfin and Rumble. But just to clear that up with you guys, the book club will continue on YouTube. Absolutely. This chapter is called The Man Comes, LA, California, page 89. The man had come out of the West, dusty and wizened. His grandfather, whose name he bore but whom he never knew, had two women, two families, one in Phoenix, the other in New Mexico. His father's half-brother, whom he never knew, was murdered by Pablo Acosta, a weed smuggler and the first Mexican drug lord. In 1939, the man's father moved the family from New Mexico to California. The agricultural town of Brawley in California's Imperial Valley was a pit stop for Depression migrants taking the southern route to the Golden State. His parents worked on the Brawley farm of a relative, and during this time the man was born. They then moved to Fresno, where his father became a farm labor contractor. His parents separated when he was 13. He went with his mother to Van Nuys in the San Fernando Valley of LA. They found a house in the Van Nuys barrio, a place without sidewalks or much police presence. This being the 1950s, Mexican Americans in the valley's sea of white people rarely ventured out of their barrios unless it was to go to work. Families in the barrio of Van Nuys owned their homes. The men were employed in the lower rungs of the movie industry or as city and county workers, paving roads, landscaping public buildings. They hung out after work at the neighborhood store and drank beer under pepper trees. The man dropped out of Van Nuys High, got his diploma at a continuation school. By then, he was also trafficking, cutting up pounds of weed and selling joints in the neighborhood. When pills, whites, reds, and bennies, became the fashion, he drove to Tijuana, stayed all weekend, bought jars of them, and tripled his money back in Van Nuys. He liked to think that he was something of a shot caller among his generation. He was 19. About then, he started using heroin. Many of the young men in Barrio Van Nuys used it, and most of them died young. He became a steam fitter later and had other jobs, 2 marriages, and children, but mostly he was, as he put it years later, a drug merchant. He liked to see himself as sticking it to the establishment, living outside the law. He served several prison terms. It usually took less than 48 hours of freedom before he was shooting up again. Not much mattered to him but the drug. He bought houses for his family, his kids. Mostly, though, money was to be used to get more dope. About the only other thing that held his interest for so many years was gambling on NFL games. What bedeviled him was a reliable source of heroin supply. His sources had always been difficult to maintain. People were always going to jail, or he was, or they died. Either way, it was always a battle to find consistently good quality heroin in large amounts. In the 1970s, he met a guy, a relative of Lieutenant of Ernesto Don Nato Fonseca. Fonseca was a grizzled Mexican drug kingpin who later gained infamy and a life prison term for his part in organizing the Sinaloa drug cartel. Fonseca's nephew, Rafael Caro Quintero, joined him behind bars for arranging the torture killing of DEA agent Enrique Kiki Camarena in 1985. The man and his contact took the train down to Mexico to buy a kilo from Fonseca. They met at the legendary Capo in a hotel that he built in downtown Culiacan, the sweltering capital of Sinaloa, the birthplace of Mexican trafficking. "I'm going to give you this kilo and see what you guys can do with it up there," Fonseca told them. "I'd like to open a market up there. You guys do right and I'll keep supplying you." For 4 months, they did Don Nato right and kept sending them kilos. And then they were arrested and the Fonseca connection disappeared. The man found other sources in Mexicali, which didn't last long either. But that was all years ago. When I met him, the man was slowed by a liver problem. His eyelids often hung at half-mast. Years of trafficking, gambling, and spiking his veins had sapped him, in his 70s, of any real mirth. He never read novels, only nonfiction. His laugh issued from him as a dry chuckle, thin as cardboard. But when he was in his late 50s, he had happened on a scheme that would, in his eyes, make his life worthwhile. It involved bringing back black tar heroin to new people in places east of the Mississippi River. He had blown into these cities across America like a wind, a different name in every town, in used old cars that were gray or beige. He left behind a drug that would change these places and bring misery to thousands of families. Through the 1990s, that drug in turn transformed the small Mexican town of Jalisco Nayarit, a place he would come to view as his own, where he would buy property and keep a woman. He was a contemporary of David Tejeda, whom he knew, though not well. Tejeda was among the pioneers to ignite the first stage of the Jalisco heroin expansion in the early 90s. The man began the second in 1998. So, after I tracked him down, I visited him often and listened to him talk about the past. He held the answer, I came to realize, to how black tar heroin crossed the Mississippi River to stay. He liked to think of himself a hero to the young men from the small town of Jalisco Nayarit, whom he recruited and taught to retail the drug. I'd have fathers and mothers come to ask me for work for their sons, knowing exactly what they were going to do, exactly what I did, he said one day in the living room of his Central Valley home. These are people who are dirt poor. They see all these other young kids with new trucks, building houses, mothers and fathers driving around in a half-nice pickup. Then the kids bugging them, I want to go up north. Initially, the market they sold to was older addicts like him, the heroin underworld that had survived since the 1970s when the drug was last popular. But as it happened, illicit use of another drug, a pharmaceutical called OxyContin, was creating a vast new market for heroin among middle and upper class white people, folks with money. When he heard about OxyContin, he began to follow it, knowing that if he did, he would soon have a market. The relentless Jalisco retail delivery system evolved as it fed on his ever-growing base of customers addicted to Oxy in America and on the deep frustration of young, landless, working-class men in Mexico. These men did not form a cartel. They could not. The envidia, small-town jealousy, and the wild bronco attitudes that rule Mexican ranchos prevented grand organizations from forming. Families cannot work together, the man told me. We're real envious of each other. But precisely because they could not, their heroin system became pernicious and successful. It aroused the entrepreneurial spirit of rancheros, young and driven, as it harnessed a cheap and addictive product to the power of small-scale free market capitalism. The system marked a radical departure in the way Mexican traffickers sold and profited from dope, and it challenged U.S. law enforcement. We didn't start the heroin dealing business, we just used a different method, the man said. We weren't a cartel. We're all small different cells. Everybody's their own group. There's a boss of each little group. They all work individually. There's some heavy dudes, some who are mediocre and some who are trying to make it. Some go bust, some got a lot. So we'll continue tomorrow on page 92, The Revolution. And like I said, it's kind of a longer chapter, so it'll be a longer episode either later today, tomorrow, or the next day. Keep fighting that good fight, guys. I'll talk to you later.